Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a historical stack of primary source material. We're talking Admiralty Court transcripts, naval architectural reports, modern forensic reconstruction, and we're going to apply it to, well, the most stubborn, sensationalized riddle in all of maritime history, the ghost ship, the Mary Celeste.
It really is the ultimate ghost story, isn't it? The core facts are just so bizarre they almost defy any rational explanation.
Right.
You have December 4th, 1872. A British ship, the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏, comes across a brigantine, just drifting, about 400 miles east of the Azores.
And this vessel is, for all intents and purposes, fine.
Perfectly fine. Seaworthy, well-provisioned, carrying a very valuable cargo. And yet, it's completely abandoned. The captain, his wife, their child, and the entire crew, 10 people, are just gone.
Gone. With no sign of a struggle, no distress call, absolutely no reason why they would have left.
And the moment that discovery was made, the myth machine just went into overdrive.
Oh, absolutely. For 150 years, our collective imagination has been filled with these wild tales of gigantic squids, sea monsters, alien abduction.
And, of course, the classic fiction of a warm meal left waiting on the table.
The warm meal, yeah.
And that sensationalism is exactly what's obscured the truth that you can actually find buried in the official records.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Exactly. We're going to use the data, the structural modifications to the ship, the chemical properties of the cargo, the detailed testimony from the salvage crew, and we're going to strip away all that hyperbole to try and uncover the rational, measurable truth of what happened.
Because the very existence of the Mary Celeste, as she was found, it violates everything we know about 19th century seamanship. A skilled captain simply does not abandon a perfectly functioning asset.
Especially not one he partially owns.
Right. Not unless the immediate threat of staying on that ship is far, far greater than the risk of getting to a tiny lifeboat in the middle of the open sea.
Precisely. We're looking for the tipping point. That specific hour on November 25, 1872, where Captain Briggs, who was a renowned, respected mariner, made a logical, calculated command decision under incredible duress.
And our sources seem to point not to one single big disaster.
No, not at all. They point to a perfect storm scenario, a lethal simultaneous convergence of really a minor mechanical failure and a terrifying chemical event.
It's a deep dive into historical forensics, and it starts, maybe appropriately, with a history of just really bad luck. We have to look at the vessel's origins, because this ship seemed to carry a profound curse long before she was ever called the Mary Celeste.
The vessel was launched way back in 1861 from the Joshua Dewis shipyard up in Nova Scotia, and at that time she was registered as the Amazon.
So she's built during a pretty prosperous time for North Atlantic trade, right as the American Civil War is kicking off.
A very busy time.
What was her design, structurally speaking? The sources call her a brigantine, but what does that actually mean? Why was that rigging so good for these demanding transatlantic routes?
Well, that's really where her efficiency came from. A brigantine, which is sometimes called a half-brig or even a hermaphrodite brig.
A hermaphrodite brig, okay.
It uses two masts. The foremast was square-rigged, so you have those classic big rectangular sails that, they maximize power when you're sailing downwind or with the wind on your beam. This was just essential for covering long distances quickly across the Atlantic.
And the main mast was different.
The main mast was fore and aft rigged. That's a more triangular rigging, and it allowed for much finer control. Better maneuverability when you're near coastlines or in harbors or trying to sail into the wind.
So you get the best of both worlds.
You really do. You had a ship that was fast and powerful on the open ocean, but agile enough to handle complex coastal trade. She was designed to be durable, efficient, and, a profitable workhorse of the Atlantic.
But that profitability just seemed impossible to achieve because she was immediately plagued by misfortune. It's like she established this reputation that would just follow her throughout her entire life.
And the sources really emphasize how deeply this history was felt in what was an intensely superstitious maritime culture. These weren't just accidents to them.
They were omens.
Exactly, and the omens started immediately. The very first captain, Robert McClellan, died of pneumonia right after the vessel was registered in 1861.
Before he even really got to commander.
Right, and in the eyes of 19th century sailors, The death of a captain before the ship even began a successful career. That wasn't just bad luck. It was a catastrophic spiritual omen. It branded the vessel from day one.
And then the next few years were just defined by collisions, which to me suggests more than just bad luck. It kind of hints at potentially poor handling or maybe even structural issues that made her difficult to control.
Absolutely. From 1863 to 1867, under a Captain William Thompson, the Amazon was involved in multiple, very costly collisions, especially in the crowded English Channel.
That's not just misfortune at that point.
No, this was chronic systemic damage that required constant, expensive repairs. But the truly definitive event, the one that really sealed her reputation, came in 1867.
The Cape Breton wreck.
Yeah.
How bad was the damage there?
It was severe enough for her owners to completely write her off as a total loss. In October of '67, a massive storm drove her violently ashore at Cowes Bay on Cape Breton Island. The damage was considered so extensive, we're likely talking a major hull breach, snapped masts, catastrophic internal structural harm, that the owners just decided that salvaging her and restoring her was not economically viable.
So she was abandoned, left for dead on the shore.
The complete derelict, left for scrap. Then she gets purchased by American interests and resurrected. And that's when they commit what sailors would consider the most cardinal sin of the sea.
They changed her name.
They changed her name. It was a commercial decision, of course. They wanted to shed the notorious reputation of the Amazon. So they extensively restored her, and in 1868, she becomes the Mary Celeste.
But for sailors, that's a huge no-no.
It's a direct invitation for the sea to exact a price for disrespecting the vessel's spirit. The new name didn't erase the history. In their minds, it just invited more trouble.
And the restoration wasn't just cosmetic, right? The sources highlight this crucial refit in 1872, just months before the final voyage, that fundamentally changed the ship's physical dynamics.
This is a point that gets missed in almost all the ghost stories, and it's so important. Originally, she was under 200 gross tons, but the 1872 refit saw her tonnage increase pretty significantly, up to 282.28 tons.
And how did they do that?
Well, it involved adding an entire second deck.
What does adding a deck do to the science of sailing? Why is that detail so important?
It's critically important because it completely alters the vessel's center of gravity. When you raise the center of gravity on a ship, you inherently increase its tendency to roll, especially in beam seas.
So while it increased her cargo capacity, making her potentially more profitable.
It also made her sailing characteristics much less predictable, particularly in a storm. She might have been stiffer initially, but her rolling moments, the way she moved in the water, would be more violent and much more difficult for a crew to compensate for.
So she's now structurally different, she's carrying the specter of the cursed Amazon, and she is potentially unstable. That newly unpredictable nature, coupled with her troubled past, that really sets the physical stage.
It does, and now we have to look at the man who would take command of this altered vessel, because the human stakes involved in this voyage fundamentally changed his risk calculation.
The man tasked with commanding the Mary Celeste was Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. And if you were looking for a captain defined by competence and integrity, Briggs was your man.
He really was the model captain. He was a teetotaler, a devout Christian, only 37 years old, and he hailed from this long dynasty of professional Massachusetts mariners. He was not the rogue, hard-drinking captain of, literary myth.
Far from it. And crucially, he was deeply invested in the vessel's success. This detail alone just eliminates entire categories of wild theories.
It does. Briggs wasn't just an employee. He was a partial owner. He held 4 shares of the vessel. He invested his life savings into the Mary Celeste.
So any suggestion of barratry, deliberately wrecking the ship for the insurance money, is completely off the table.
Utterly. Why would he financially ruin himself and commit a crime that would cost him his reputation, his freedom, and given his devout nature, his eternal soul?
He wouldn't. The incentive was overwhelmingly in favor of him protecting that vessel at all costs. The only thing that could make him abandon his own property was an immediate, overwhelming threat to human life.
And that threshold for abandonment was dramatically lowered by who he brought with him.
His family.
Yes. Briggs's wife, Sarah Elizabeth, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, were sailing with him. The presence of a toddler completely changes the decision matrix for a captain.
Of course.
When a perceived emergency hits, the instinct to protect his family is going to override the professional obligation to save the property. He's going to evacuate sooner than a man sailing with only a professional crew.
And Sarah, in a letter she wrote just before they sailed from New York on November 3, 1872, she gives us this incredible piece of evidence that the physical issues we just talked about with the refit were already presenting themselves.
That letter is remarkable. It really is. Because it gives us a direct sensory input from someone who isn't a professional mariner. She described the vessel feeling home-like, which is lovely, but she immediately followed that with a complaint.
What did she say?
She complained about such an amount of thumping and bumping, of shakings and tossings to and fro of the cargo.
That's fascinating. So the instability of the ship's structure, maybe made worse by that 1872 refit, was translating directly into a violent, unstable stowage of the cargo below decks.
Precisely. And speaking of the cargo, before we get to that, we should probably address the crew, just to dismiss the fiction.
Right, because later investigators and, novelists, they claimed mutiny, driven by these xenophobic tropes about foreign sailors.
Exactly. But what did the manifest actually tell us about the professionalism of the crew?
The manifests show a competent, professional, and really a standard mix of Atlantic trade sailors for the era. The first mate, Albert G. Richardson, he was an American who had sailed with brigs before. They were comfortable with each other.
Right. And the sailors.
The sailors, the Lawrenson brothers, Martins and 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏, they were German and Danish. The investigation found zero evidence of any previous strife, drunkenness, or dissent among them. They were just skilled, ordinary seamen hired for a specific purpose.
So if the humans were highly professional, they had no cause for mutiny, and the captain had every financial incentive to stay with his ship.
Then we have to turn our focus entirely to what was in the hold.
To the 7,701 barrels of rectified spirits. This is where the story shifts from human dynamics to chemical physics.
So this cargo, it's worth about $37,000. It's industrial alcohol, basically denatured ethanol, and it's on its way to Genoa to be used in fortifying Italian wines.
Correct.
So why was this cargo stored in what you'd assume were secure barrels? Why was it basically a silent bomb?
Because of a cost-cutting measure that proved to be fatal, the red oak factor. The construction of the barrels themselves was a critical flaw.
Okay, walk us through that. What's the difference between the industry standard for storing high-proof spirits and what the Mary Celeste was actually carrying?
Well, the standard is white oak. It always has been. White oak is incredibly dense, and it contains a specific cellular structure called tyloses.
Tyloses?
They're essentially natural plugs that form during the tree's growth. They make the wood incredibly tight-grained, which prevents almost all leakage or evaporation. It's why white oak is used for whiskey and other aging spirits. It keeps the contents contained.
Okay, so white oak is the gold standard, and the Mary Celeste's barrels.
We were made of red oak,
Ah.
and red oak lacks these tyloses. It is significantly more porous, and it's cheaper. This decision likely saved the supplier a bit of money, but it created a vessel that was, in effect, leaking liquid and vapor from day one.
And they depart New York in November in cold waters, but then they sail south. They hit the warmer Gulf Stream and eventually the Azores. What happens chemically as that temperature increases?
It's basic physics. Ethanol, like a lot of liquids, expands and vaporizes dramatically with rising temperature. And because the red oak was porous, that expanding alcohol vapor, these highly volatile ethanol fumes, began to sweat out through the wood.
It just accumulates.
Silently in the confined, unventilated spaces of the hold and the lower decks.
And the evidence of this leakage was actually found later, wasn't it?
It was. The boarding party found that 9 of the 7,701 barrels were empty when they were discovered. That confirms significant leakage, both liquid and vapor.
So just think about that for a second. You had this highly flammable gas cloud just building up below decks. For a sailor in the 1870s, fire was the ultimate existential threat.
It's the greatest psychological terror imaginable, especially since the vapor itself is invisible. You can't see the danger that's building up around you.
So if the vapor is invisible, how would the crew even know they had a major problem before the actual event occurred?
They would likely smell it. They might even taste it in the air. But the real danger is that they wouldn't know the exact concentration. They would only know there was enough leakage to create this pungent, alarming atmosphere.
So you're sailing on a ship where you constantly smell potent alcohol, and you know a single spark from the ship's friction, a stray pipe ember, the galley fire, could ignite the entire space.
It's a terrifying thought.
So we have a structurally unstable ship, a captain who's highly invested in his family's safety, and a cargo that is slowly turning the hold into a potential bomb. These three factors all converge as they're nearing their destination.
That's right. The Mary Celeste left New York on November 7, 1872. They hit the typical severe weather of a North Atlantic crossing in November, but, the ship held together. It did its job.
And the lugs confirmed they were progressing well. But the final crucial piece of hard evidence from Captain Brus himself is that last log entry.
That entry is dated November 25 at 8 a.m. They recorded their position as roughly 6 miles northeast of Santa Maria Island in the Azores.
So they had made it. They had a successful crossing, they were nearly safe, and land was clearly visible from the deck.
And this is why the timing is so essential. The crew would have been thinking of safety, arrival, relief. The catastrophe, whatever it was, struck shortly after that 8 a.m. entry while land was still within easy reach.
And then, 9 days later, on December 4th, she's intercepted by the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏. Tell us about the strange coincidence involving the two captains.
It's an extraordinary historical footnote. The captain of the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏, a man named David Morehouse, he actually knew Captain Briggs personally.
They knew each other.
They had dined together in New York just weeks before, discussing their mutual voyage plans. So for Morehouse to spot Briggs's ship, steering wildly, what sailors call yawing, that must have been deeply, deeply unsettling.
So Morehouse sends his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and second mate, John Wright, to investigate. And their court testimony, later in Gibraltar, is the core forensic record of this entire incident. Let's break down what they found.
DeVoe's findings are incredibly meticulous. First, regarding the ship's condition, the sails were mostly set for heavy weather, what they call shortened sail. This means the crew was prepared for, but not defeated by, a storm.
So the ship was under control.
Essentially, yes. Some topsails were blown out, which indicates a rough period, but the ship was structurally sound. The most telling sign of a sudden abandonment was the wheel. It was found spinning loose and unlashed.
And no captain would do that.
Never! You don't secure your wheel before leaving a vessel unless you are leaving in extreme, immediate haste.
Now, the pumps are a major clue, right? They suggest one half of this perfect storm theory. What did they find regarding the pumps?
They found evidence of an active crisis in progress. One pump was disassembled on the deck with its valve drawn. This proves the crew was actively working to clear a blockage or repair it.
And how much water was in the hold?
They sounded the hold and found approximately 1 meter, or about 3.5 feet, of water.
Which is a significant amount of water, but it's certainly not enough to warrant abandoning a vessel of that size immediately.
Exactly. A meter of water in the bilge of a wooden ship is usually manageable. But the key is the fact that the pump was out of commission. That's what creates the perception of a much bigger problem.
And the second half of the mystery, the chemical fear, is supported by the state of the hatches.
Yes. The main hatch, which covered the bulk of the alcohol cargo, was securely battened down. That means no major explosion had destroyed the main deck. But the forehatch was open, with its cover lying casually on the deck beside it. This suggests the opening was intentional, maybe to vent that accumulating vapor, or perhaps the hatch was blown off by an internal force.
And given the highly volatile cargo, that's a very strong indication that the event, whatever it was centered right there in the forepeak.
It is.
And the ultimate confirmation that the crew didn't just vanish, but that they executed an emergency departure.
The single yawl lifeboat was missing, and the rail section that's necessary to launch it was found either removed or purposefully opened. They didn't just disappear, they consciously and deliberately took the lifeboat.
The things they chose to take with them tell us they absolutely intended to survive.
They took the non-negotiables. The chronometer and the sextant, the two tools you absolutely require for accurate navigation. They also took the ship's register and the manifest, the legal papers they would need to prove ownership and collect insurance once they reached port.
So they were planning to navigate to the visible land, to Santa Maria.
Absolutely. They left behind personal things, food, clothing, valuables. This just screams urgent necessity, but an organized intent to survive and eventually return.
So we can definitively debunk the literary myths right here. What did DeVoe testify about the state of the cabin in the galley? Was there a warm breakfast?
DeVoe's detailed testimony just crushed that fictional narrative. He stated the cabin was wet and messy, but that was entirely due to the vessel rolling without a helmsman to stabilize her in the swells.
And the galley.
Critically, he explicitly testified that the galley was clean and there was no food or drink on the table. The image of the warm breakfast is pure, unadulterated fiction born years later.
So, DeVoe and his crew, they managed to sail the Mary Celeste all the way to Gibraltar, a feat that in itself confirmed the vessel's fundamental seaworthiness. They must have been expecting a massive salvage reward.
They were, but instead they sailed directly into the eye of a legal storm.
The Gibraltar Vice Admiralty Court proceedings were a disaster, and that was largely because of the intense prejudice of the Attorney General, Frederick Solly Flood.
Solly Flood, who seems to have harbored this deep skepticism of all mariners, was convinced from the very beginning that this had to be a case of foul play. Murder, piracy, or maybe that the salvors themselves had killed Briggs and staged the whole thing.
So what were his major lines of attack in court?
He zeroed in on anything that even remotely suggested violence. His primary target was the famous blood stains. He claimed that blood was found on the captain's sword, which lay below decks, and on the rail of the ship.
And he used these claims to fuel this narrative of a violent struggle or a mutiny.
He did, but his claims were systematically contradicted by his own evidence.
How so?
Well, Solly Flood ordered a Dr. J. Patron to analyze the alleged blood, and Dr. Patron confirmed through contemporary chemical testing that the substance was not hemoglobin. It wasn't blood, it was citrate of iron.
Just rust.
Just rust, likely caused by humidity acting on iron fixings or the metallic parts of the sword's scabbard.
And what about the claim of intentional damage to the vessel? The marks on the bow that he said suggested malice.
He claimed those marks were intentional cuts, maybe inflicted by the crew of the Dei Gratia to make the vessel look distressed. However, the shipwrights who were called to testify confirmed that these marks were completely consistent with natural stripping and damage from the sea's action, or maybe minor contact with ice earlier in the voyage.
So, not man-made malice.
Not at all. The court ultimately found no evidence of foul play and deemed Mary Celeste to be seaworthy. But the damage had already been done.
The atmosphere of suspicion, which was fueled by Solly Flood's aggressive posturing and his xenophobia, it just hung over the whole verdict.
It really did. The court awarded the salvors only £1,700, which was a meager 1/5 of the insured value.
That's a devastating injustice. For a vessel found derelict at sea, a typical salvage award could be as high as 50%.
Oh, easily. The low award was a clear punishment. It reflected the court's lingering and entirely unjustified doubt that something illegal had happened. They were financially penalizing Captain Morehouse and his crew for their honesty and their skill.
So the legal system failed to find the rational truth because it was obsessed with finding a crime.
Exactly. But since the law couldn't explain why a professional, honest captain left a seaworthy vessel, we have to look beyond human malice and into the realm of chemical physics. And that brings us to the perfect storm.
We've established that the abandonment was a rational decision, but it was driven by an existential fear. And this fear was likely compounded by the simultaneous convergence of two major threats. Let's start with the first one, the mechanical threat, what we're calling Theory A, the clogged pump.
Right. We know the pump was found disassembled on the deck, and we know there were 3.5 feet of water in the hold. To really understand the panic, though, we have to look at the Mary Celeste's cargo history.
She had previously carried coal.
She had, which meant there was residual coal dust, debris, and silt just sitting in the bilges.
Oh, okay.
So when the violent November seas tossed the ship around, all that debris would have been violently churned up, turning the bilge water into this thick, gritty sludge.
And this is the sludge that clogged the pump.
Precisely. It clogged the pump, rendering the crew unable to clear the water.
Now, here's where I want to challenge the assumption of panic. If the water was only 3.5 feet deep, wouldn't an experienced captain like Briggs know that was manageable? At least for a temporary period, especially when they were only 6 miles from land. Doesn't this put a bit too much weight on a simple perception error?
That's an excellent challenge, and it means the panic can't be based on the actual amount of water, but on what Briggs believed the water level was.
Okay.
Here's how that perception error would happen. Briggs knows the pumps are broken. He needs an immediate sounding of the well. If the sounding rod was faulty, or perhaps the severe, continuous rolling of the ship caused the water to violently slosh high up the sounding pipe right before the rod was retrieved.
The sounding rod would deliver a false catastrophic reading.
It would. The carpenter runs up and reports, "Captain, we have 4, maybe 5 feet of water and we can't clear it." So Briggs sees visible land nearby, but he believes his vessel is taking on water faster than he can compensate, and that the clock is ticking. This creates the sinking fear, the mechanical failure that starts the evacuation process in his mind.
But it's not quite enough to override all logic. This has to bring us to the ultimate tipping point, Theory B, the alcohol explosion theory, the chemical terror that would have hit moments after that initial high water report.
This is the invisible threat. We already established the precondition. The porous red oak barrels leaking ethanol fumes, creating this hazardous vapor cloud in the hold. All that was needed was a spark.
And how was this theory actually tested in the modern era?
In 2006, a forensic scientist named Dr. Andreas Sella, working in the UK, performed this remarkable reconstruction. He simulated the conditions of the Mary Celeste's hold, a high concentration of alcohol vapor, and he introduced a spark.
What happened? Did the ship just detonate?
No, and this is the crucial distinction. It created something called a deflagration.
Deflagration?
Right. A massive detonation, which is a rapid combustion, that would leave scorch marks and obliterate the deck structure. A deflagration is a subsonic pressure wave explosion. It's a high-velocity expansion of gas that is actually relatively cool.
So the vapor ignites, you get this massive deafening boom, and maybe a visible flash of blue flame, which is the signature of alcohol burning rapidly.
But it moves too fast to ignite the wood permanently, which means it leaves no permanent trace of soot or charring. This perfectly explains why the fore-hatch cover was blown off the vessel, landing intact on the deck, and why the boarders found no smoke damage inside the hold.
So the scene is this. Briggs is already terrified about a faulty sinking report. Then, a massive deafening boom hits, followed by a flash of blue flame, and the fore-hatch cover lands on the deck in front of everyone.
For Briggs, a devout man who abstained from alcohol but was carrying 1,700 barrels of it, this wasn't just a fire. This was confirmation that the entire cargo was volatile and that the vessel was just seconds away from a massive secondary detonation that would vaporize his family and his ship.
That fear, that combination of sinking and immediate invisible obliteration, is the only scenario that makes his next action rational.
He must evacuate immediately.
Okay, let's reconstruct the scene. It's November 25, 1872, right after that 8:00 a.m. log entry. The sea is still rough, but Santa Maria is just 6 miles away. The crew is preparing for landfall.
And then the crisis point. The carpenter reports the impossible water level because of the clogged pumps. That's the sinking fear.
And then simultaneously, the friction of the rolling ship, or maybe a slight lapse of attention from a crew member, provides the spark that causes the vapor deflagration.
The boom hits, the hatch lifts, the crew sees the blue flame. Briggs believes they are facing immediate death. His priority shifts instantly and irrevocably from preserving the asset to preserving life, specifically the lives of Sarah and little Sophia.
The evacuation is carried out with this urgent, organized haste. They launch the yawl boat, they grab the chronometer, the sextant, the register.
Right. They intend to row the Visible 6 miles to Santa Maria, or maybe just wait out the perceived explosion and then get back on board. They don't take food or water because they assume they will be on land or back on their ship within hours.
And this leads to the tragic, ingenious, and ultimately fatal maneuver, the tether.
Yes. They secure the small, overloaded yawl boat to the Mary Celeste using a long tow line. It was most likely the main peak halyard, which was later found trailing from the ship when she was discovered.
So they weren't just flaying wildly, they were executing a controlled separation. Why the long tow line?
It was a survival tactic, and it was designed for that specific scenario. They needed to be far enough away to survive the anticipated massive explosion, the main detonation, while remaining connected to the vessel in case it didn't blow up, or if they needed to retrieve supplies.
They were using the Mary Celeste as an anchor while they waited for the danger to pass.
Exactly, and this is where the physical characteristics of the ship we talked about in part, and her durability, her efficient rigging, conspire against them.
It's the moment of ultimate irony.
It is. As the wind picked up again, the Mary Celeste, still under partial sail, began to accelerate forward. The heavy yawl boat, weighed down by 10 people and fighting the residual rough seas, acted as an incredible drag against the ship.
The force has just become too great. The tow line snaps.
The tow line snaps, and you just have to think of the terror of that moment. They are 6 miles from salvation, 6 miles from their ultimate destination, and they are watching their home, their shelter, their only source of food and water sail away from them under partial canvas.
And only by the wind.
The sturdy, seaworthy Mary Celeste outran them completely.
And Briggs and his crew are left in an open boat, overloaded, trying desperately to row 6 miles to an island against the elements, with no food, no water, and really no realistic chance of success.
They were overwhelmed by the elements and lost without a trace. The central agonizing irony of the Mary Celeste is that her fundamental structural integrity, the fact that she weathered the storm, survived the deflagration, and was still capable of sailing herself for 10 more days, is precisely what doomed her crew.
The ship that was supposed to save them sailed away and guaranteed they were never found.
The scientific and forensic explanation for what happened to the Mary Celeste was all right there in 1872 in the Gibraltar court records. But the public simply did not want the truth.
No wanted the sensational story.
They did, and they got it, courtesy of a struggling writer named Arthur Conan Doyle.
This is years before Sherlock Holmes made him famous.
Years before. He published J. Habakkuk Jeffson's statement in 1884, and this fictional account was immediately and irrevocably conflated with the real facts by a hungry public.
What were the key elements that Doyle fabricated, the things that have now become central to the ghost ship mythology?
Well, the two most famous are the domestic details and the name itself. Doyle introduced the famous misspelling, Marie Celeste.
Marie, not Mary.
Right. And he fabricated all those scenes of interrupted domesticity. The warm tea or the warm breakfast waiting on the table, the ticking clock, all of these details designed to convey a sudden, unnatural disappearance.
And crucially, he introduced the element of violence that Sully Flood so desperately wanted to find. He fabricated this racist trope of a vengeful ex-slave murdering the crew, which lent fuel to all the piracy theories.
The fact is, the technical explanation, the clogged pumps, the red oak, the deflagration, it was just too mundane for the Victorian imagination. Doyle's fiction became historical fact in the public mind.
The vessel just became a blank canvas for every supernatural theory possible.
From the Bermuda Triangle to sea monsters, you nod it.
And because of that lingering, powerful, and fictitious reputation, the vessel itself could not escape its unlucky branding, which led directly to its ignoble final act.
The ship was salvaged, refitted, and sold multiple times, always depreciating in value because of that lingering reputation. And this led to her ultimate demise, which, ironically, was the exact crime Captain Briggs was unjustly accused of committing.
Insurance fraud.
Insurance fraud. In 1885, the Mary Celeste was acquired by Captain Gilman C. Parker, who was a known con artist looking to exploit the vessel's bad name.
And Parker's scheme was just textbook barratry, right?
Absolutely. He loaded the Mary Celeste not with valuable trade goods, but with absolute trash cheap boots, cat food, construction scrap. He then fraudulently insured this worthless cargo for an exorbitant sum, over $30,000, intending to stage a wreck and claim the total loss.
And how did he choose to stage the wreck?
On January 3, 1885, Parker deliberately sailed the Mary Celeste directly onto the Rochelle Reef off the coast of Haiti. His plan was simple: sink the vessel and have the sea swallow the fraudulent cargo.
But fittingly, the Mary Celeste was just too sturdy.
She was. She failed to sink completely.
And when the insurance surveyors arrived, what did they find?
They found the intact wreckage and immediately discovered the fraudulent cargo. The cheap boots and refuse were valuable goods should have been. Parker and his co-conspirators were charged with barratry and fraud.
And were they convicted?
They were actually acquitted on a legal technicality, but the ensuing scandal ruined Parker completely, and he died in disgrace shortly thereafter.
So the true fate of the Mary Celeste wasn't some glorious maritime mystery, but a pitiful, failed insurance scam just left to rot on a reef.
And even today, the true physical remains of the original 1861 vessel are still considered lost, despite numerous attempts by maritime archaeologists to locate them.
When we look at the entire arc, from the ill-fated Amazon to the forensic analysis of ethanol deflagration, and then finally the shame of the insurance fraud, the enduring truth of the Mary Celeste is not one of supernatural horror.
Not at all. It is the profound tragedy of a rational man, Captain Benjamin Briggs, making a logical decision to save his family from what he perceived to be imminent destruction.
The true ghost of the Mary Celeste is just the silent, invisible vapor of industrial alcohol, combined with the paranoia caused by a single mechanical failure.
The heartbreaking irony just persists. The evidence of the rational chain of events, the disassembled pump, the open hatch, the missing lifeboat, it was all recorded in painstaking detail in the Gibraltar records. But it was completely overridden by the power of sensationalism, first by a prejudiced court official, and later by a popular novelist.
So what does this whole deep dive into a 150-year-old nautical mystery mean for you today? We've established that Captain Briggs, a high-stakes decision-maker, abandoned his million-dollar asset because sensory input, a loud boom, a flash of fire, a report of rising water, overrode the logic that his ship was actually seaworthy. He reacted to the perceived catastrophe, not the objective reality.
And this raises a critical question for all of us living in a world that is defined by information overload and constant crises, both real and manufactured. In the face of intense pressure and alarming sensory data, how do we distinguish between an actual existential catastrophe and a scenario that merely feels catastrophic? The Mary Celeste is a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't the threat outside, but the fear we internalize, causing us to abandon the very vessel that could have saved us.